there, Corona TV viewers. I'm Johnny Damon.
You're my bobblehead doll today. Just nod up and down if you agree. Welcome to the show, Mitch Joel. How are you?
Happy birthday to you.
And just look at those washboard abs.
I know, right? Oh yeah, this is the fittest I've ever been in my life, you know.
Happy birthday from Johnny Damon.
First of all, let's just do the elbow bump. Well, hello, everybody. I hope you are well. It is Monday. It is January 18th. I have not asked her yet, my guest today, but I will soon enough if she knows where I am in the world. Something to think about. But I'm on location. I'm traveling again, at least in my mind, in theater of the mind. I have become a world traveler again, and I'm excited to be back with you. No matter where I am in the world, there will always be time for Corona TV. Well, I'm going to mix up a few things today. Normally, I end with my soliloquy and then welcome my guest. But today, I'm basically going to start with it. And the reason is that it is Martin Luther King Day today. And it was funny because I actually saw this on the homepage of Apple today. We've had many, and dare I say the word many, conversations over the last 10 months or so about brands not really being able to take their one foot out their mouth in order to insert the other one, so to speak. They're not able to articulate and really be able to have a point of view and speak truth. In many cases, the advice, which is sound, is sometimes the best thing to do is just to listen and rather than have to talk. But I think Apple is a brand that certainly has earned the right to have a point of view. And this is all you see on the homepage of Apple today. And I thought it would be actually the basis for my seated soliloquy today. And so the seated soliloquy today, in keeping with that quote, is called True Peace. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice." Now I'll quote Tom Kiefer or Joni Mitchell, "Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you got till it's gone?" Now, while they were singing about love, relationships, or paradise, which became a parking lot, MLK was talking about something slightly loftier. These days, when we hear the word peace, it is in context of the peaceful transfer of power, which, according to the talking heads on TV, is the cornerstone of our democracy. In the history of this country, I'm not sure it was something that we really understood or at a minimum fully appreciated. Would I be wrong to say we took it for granted? Well, that is until present day. Then there's the phrase, the absence of tension. By his definition, true peace needs agreement, consensus, collaboration, unity, the ability for everyone to set aside their differences and come together under a nobler common good, a cause that trumps everything underneath it, from petty squabbles to fundamental differences. We hear the phrase a lot from politicians. I might not agree with most of what he or she had to say, but ... Now, the but is important. It implies the ability to elevate a man or woman of principle, a good person, a person with morals, a person of integrity, to set aside that which divides us in favor of that which brings us together. And so finally, the presence of justice. Justice may be blind, but not when 1,000 cell phone cameras capture moments of chaos, anarchy, and insurrection. Justice may be swift, but not when a global pandemic rages, cars line up and wait for hours for food, and a vaccine rolls out just way too slowly. Justice, like peace, is not something that can be taken for granted either. It is something that has to be fought for, earned, preserved. There's something about MLK's phrase, that does not imply weakness, a passive approach, submission. You sense power, strength in numbers, and those numbers are you, me, us, we the people. To move forward, we must do it as one. United we stand, divided we fall. We do it for those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice in the past. We do it for the generations that are yet to come. But above all, we do it for peace. Well, I really wanted the ability to talk to this day, having a show on this day, and have a point of view. Thank you, Manuel. I do appreciate your point of view as well. Well, let's get on with the show. We've got an amazing, amazing week ahead. Ahava, and I should have said to her in the background, so I'm going to see now. I should have asked her how to pronounce her last name. I would say Leibtag. Yep, thank goodness. Could have bluffed it, but Ahava Leibtag is my guest today. John Miller tomorrow. We've got a B2B extravaganza this week. Mr. Jason Falls on Wednesday, and then finally Adam Ferrier on Thursday. We have 2 Corona cocktails this week. First of all, on Wednesday, there is the inauguration. And so Jason and I are going to respect the inauguration, which is at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, by not doing a show. And also, we just want to make sure that there isn't, we still have a country at 5 p.m. So we'll be here if the world is still turning at 5 p.m. on Wednesday. And then Adam actually lives in Australia. So rather than have him dial in at 4 a.m. in the morning, we're going to do 2 sets of cocktails. I might be having coffee, but we're going to have cocktails nonetheless. But today, as I said, we're focusing on Ahava, and Ahava is the one bookend. And then on the other side, Melanie Diesel, Angelina Jaspers, Carla Johnson, Scott McCain, and Peter Rourke. Just so excited to have these guests back in the studio. I'm not really sure who C is, by the way, now that I look at it, but happy birthday for my Facebook friends who celebrated birthdays on the weekend. Mr. Chuck Heeman, 7HCK himself, a little bit of an inside joke there. Tom Bedicere, and then today, Mr. Nick Bryan. Of course, Mr. Jason Falls himself, the birthday boy. I'm going to have to sing happy birthday to him. And Dory Bombach, the other half of Things I Love 203. There we go. Things I Love 203, which for those of you that know is my wife and Dory's Instagram account, but more importantly, their business focused on interior designing, on apparel, on fashion, at Things I Love 203. Go and follow them on Instagram. Do it for Dory. Do it for her because it is her birthday at the end of the day. So just a little bit about my Facebook birthdays, and then just very quickly to tell you who's celebrating birthdays on LinkedIn. There's Mark Evans, there's Daniel Shore, there's Skip Graham, Maya McNulty, Brand-On Mulch. I like that. And then finally today, David Estrello, Mahak Gupta, Robert Scoble. Robert Scoble, there is a name that I haven't heard in a while. So have a great day, Mr. Scobelizer. So as I said, everything's a little bit upside down today, but it is a Monday. So my fat blogging update tells you that I put on a pound. I don't know what the hell is going on because I'm on that Peloton bike now pretty much every single day. And yet the weight is being stubborn. But you know that every Monday, come rain or shine, I'm going to be sharing my weight with you. Well, now you don't have to wait anymore for me to welcome my guest, Ahava Leibtag. And just a very brief, I love her brief background because she knows a thing or two about content. As Bruce Turkel would say, don't bore us, get to the chorus. Ahava Leibtag is president of AHA Media Group, a content marketing firm focused in the healthcare space. Her hot pink glasses are a sign that she's super fun, brave, and believes in keeping things interesting. So let's welcome her on the show and her pink glasses. Ahava, welcome to Corona TV.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I actually thought about putting my contact lenses in, so I'm really glad I didn't.
And I'm glad I did not put in my contact lenses as well, because we have beautiful common themes of pink, of hot pink, of red as in love, as in your name, your Hebrew name, which means love. And nobody loves content, I suppose, like you do. So the background is homage to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's
but now, more importantly, have you figured out exactly where I am in the world?
I want to say the Dead Sea.
Exactly. And why am I at the Dead Sea?
Well, I don't really know. Do you live in Israel? I guess you're traveling, so you don't.
No, I do not live in Israel. I am in Westport, Connecticut. But that is the Ahava factory.
Oh, right.
So, the puns will keep on rolling, so to speak.
Oh, no, I better get ready.
No, I think pretty much I'm done. I think I don't have anything else.
Actually, I do have a very nice idea about that. The word ahava in Hebrew comes from the Arabic hav, which means to give. And I think it shows that love is really about giving. And that's a really great way to think about content, because that's what content should be. It should be in service to the people you're creating it for.
Listen, if people just took that away from this entire show and they used that as the cornerstone of their content strategy, the world would be a better place. No doubt. I mean, that is brilliant. I think that's fantastic. Well, before we get into the main content of the show, let's just see who is out there. Mr. Stephen Rubin is here. He is watching. And Tom Morris said, great start to the show, an eloquent reminder of what matters. Yeah, I mean, love matters, Tom, but also the ability to give. And MLK certainly contributed, and then some, to the world at large, to humanity. So appreciate your comments as well. But Ahava, before we get into the main show, we always like to send our detectives around the world, our sleuths, to Israel, to the four corners of the world, to find out some fun facts about our guests. And this is what we found out about you. So, this is probably not you, actually. I mean, you seem happy about it, but the fact is you have never eaten shellfish in your life because you are kosher.
That's right. I keep a kosher diet. So I've never had lobster, never had octopus, never had squid, dying to know what those things taste like. But, I was raised in a kosher home and I keep a kosher home. And so, yeah, haven't found out. Good friends of mine have told me just take cod and, dip it in garlic butter and you'll get the same effect. But it's good to have things that keep you curious in life.
So now I'll tell you something about me, which is I too have never eaten shellfish in my entire life because I too am kosher.
Oh, there you go. See?
So although I once had one calamari ring because I was trying to impress a girl who may or may not be my wife. But other than that, and it tasted like a rubber tire. But other than that, no. So I'd like to believe we're not missing anything, although I'm sure a lot of people would disagree with us.
Yeah, I think that we probably are missing something, but everyone's missing something. So it just depends what, you decide you're the way you're going to live your life and the values you're going to ascribe to.
Indeed. Well, one thing that you have not missed out on in your life is your love for mint choc chip, which, by the way, is yet another thing we have in common. It is my favorite flavor, although you recently turned your back on mint choc chip.
I didn't turn my back. I did not turn my back. So this ice cream is unbelievable. Definitely go get that ice cream. But what I always say about mint chocolate chip ice cream is that whenever you go into a gourmet ice cream shop, you will know if it's a good one based on their mint chocolate chip. It has to be the right color green. It has to have the right ratio of ice cream to chocolate chips. The chocolate chips have to be like a mixture of chips and chunks. I mean, it's very complex. But once they have good mint chocolate chip ice cream, you can be pretty sure that the rest of their ice cream flavors are good. It happened to be that one time my husband brought home Caramel Sutra. It was actually the day after the election. and I really needed to emotionally eat. And that ice cream flavor was just like, wow, this is amazing. So I think it's a good metaphor for content too. Sometimes it's always a good idea to try something new. So, so that's been my go-to, my ride or die right now. But mint chocolate chip will never leave my heart.
Well, I think that warrants us going back to hearts for a moment. I mean, mint chocolate chip for me, if there's only one flavor, I don't know what it is. And it's also weird, by the way, when you talk about flavors, this might be maybe a little analogy for context versus content. But for example, I love fruit flavored. I mean, I like fruit, but I love fruit flavored candy. So apple, banana, like there are certain flavors that I just, like Laffy Taffy. I just crave the banana or the apple or the grape. And it's just funny how sometimes a flavor in a different environment can take on a different meaning.
It's totally true. I think about, I love artificial watermelon flavor in different candy, but I would never eat that in an ice cream. So it's a good point. Yeah.
So now, Tom says, I think cod in garlic butter is probably a good flavor and texture twin. Okay. I do not think that it will be a Ben & Jerry's ice cream flavor anytime soon.
You never know. You never know with them.
But now let's get into the mint as opposed to the chocolate chip of this discussion. And by the way, Adam John says, content should be in service to the people you are creating it for. Oh my God, I just fell off my chair.
Sorry, Adam. I hope you dust yourself off and have a better day.
I think the heart tells us that this was a good falling off the chair. But yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful soundbite. And we are just creating for the sake of creating for the most part. You spoke about this idea of the content flood. So I decided to keep it biblical, because we've got enough common threads to suggest that we can ride this red thread for just a while longer.
Jewish Corona TV.
Yeah, it's Corona TV, but with a K for kosher.
Exactly.
But Ahava, tell us about what is this content flood? Is it coming? Is it here? How do we build the ark? Feel free to extend this metaphor as long as you need to.
Yeah. So Mark Schaefer coined this term. He called it content shock. And he was talking about how there's so much content out there now that it's almost impossible to grab people's attention and get them to read through the content. And, almost any topic you research, you will find, tons of blog posts, tons of white papers. And it's really hard to sort of get people's attention, like he said, but also to impress upon people that you're the authority and that you're the expert. And I can think of no better example of this than the coronavirus pandemic, because what we're seeing is that because of the politicization of information, right, the infodemic, as it were, people are not trusting certain places that they always trusted. For example, the Kaiser Foundation found that people's trust in the CDC website went down 19 points during the pandemic, which is a massive, massive crisis, because as the entity that's supposed to guide the American public during a pandemic, for them to lose 19 points of trust shows that we're in big trouble. And if you have, nature abhors a vacuum. So if the CDC isn't giving people what they need, then that would then say that other places are swooping in to provide content that may not be real, true, or authentic to what people really need to hear. So from that perspective, the way that I think of the content flood is that people are being carried away on a current of content that they subscribe to and know about, rather than, being able to really figure out what's true, what's authentic, what they really need to be paying attention to, who their trusted authors are. So definitely creates concern and worry on the part of those of us that adhere to the idea that we should be giving people information that's true and real and that we can prove on some level. So it's very concerning.
But this idea of being whisked away, in a current of your choosing, so there's no fighting against the current, there's the letting the current take you. And maybe in this particular case, as I said, we're going to extend a metaphor, maybe beyond the pale. But the ark, we've also built this ark. We've, in this case, maybe we weren't told to build an ark, or we were just given an ark, and we just readily insulated ourselves in, and I guess thought we were protecting ourselves. But the reality is we weren't protecting ourselves at all. We were isolating ourselves from all the let's just say the forces outside.
See, so I don't agree that we realized what was happening. I think that the big tech companies told us exactly who they were, and we didn't listen. So, Google made it very clear our mission is to organize the world's information. Well, anybody who really knows anything about organization knows that if you get to organize something, you get to own it, and you get to decide who sees what when. And Facebook, through probably not even the realization of their own, but what happened organically over time and in service to their business, were affected by the need to sell ads. And the way that you sell ads and you sell information is by categorizing people within groups and giving them the names of friends that are like them and giving them the names of groups that they might like. And so all of those algorithms that were really in service to a business became in disservice to the American public and their ability to make decisions, and probably the international community as well, though I don't know as much about it, so I won't speak to it. But what I will say is that, I don't know what the arc looks like. I don't know how to solve this problem, because you can't expect people to change their minds when they're not even exposed to different opinions, or they won't even listen to them. I mean, even Mitch McConnell said, we can't continue to go along as a country like this with two different sets of facts. It's just not possible. And actually, I don't know how people think of this, but there's a fact, and if there's an alternative fact, then that's a lie. So we've got a problem on our hands, and I'm not really sure how to fix it until we develop some sort of trust in the people who are giving us information again. And if you have people listening to one media outlet that has a political agenda, it's going to be very difficult to convince them of otherwise. I mean, I literally talk to people on the other end of the political spectrum. I happen to be sort of in this interesting position where I sort of ascribe to more, I would say, centrally democratic ideas, and my family is extremely Republican and conservative. And when they talk to me, I literally think to myself, where are you getting this information from? It is just not true. It is misproven. It literally goes at the fundamentals of democracy, and it's terrifying.
I was dealing with a delightful elderly lady from my local synagogue who, shall we say, has very different views to mine politically. And she just keeps sending me conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
And so she sent me this new one from, Italy conducted these autopsies on people that had passed away from COVID, even though they weren't allowed to. And they defied them and they found out that, in fact, this isn't a virus, it's a bacteria. And went on, and we've been lied to, and our elderly are killing us. And I just said, this is not true. And she said, how do I know? And I said, because I know. It's just not true.
Well, the reason that you know is because a bacteria is treated with an antibiotic, and they've tried treating this with antibiotics and has not worked. So if you know fundamentals in science, then you're able to combat those ideas. But even when I talk to people who I know are somewhat intelligent, and I don't understand why they're not listening, because it just doesn't make any sense. I had a conversation with somebody in my family, and I said to him, do you honestly believe that there's a 50-state conspiracy to not allow Trump to have a second term? And he's like, yes. I'm like, okay, so explain to me how this happens. The Republicans were able to win a lot of House seats. So what you're telling me is that the ballot for the Republicans who won the House seats, they faked those ballots to make sure the Republicans could win, but they split the ballot so that Joe Biden would win. How does that work? They did that. They faked it. It was empty ballot. I mean, okay, well, why didn't the courts find problems? They were against him. I said, these were Republican governors and Republican secretaries of state. Why would they go against Trump? They're part of his party. They don't want him in power. It's sort of like you just sort of say to yourself, we're in real trouble here, like massive, massive trouble.
Well, I had Tamsin Webster on the show a while back.
I love Tamsin.
She's amazing, and she introduced in our after show, which is the hidden jewel of the show, because it's the conversations that happen afterwards when we bring in our our regulars. She introduced us to this idea of what she called I think she called it paradoxical thinking, but it's what you do is you actually take thinking through. You say, all right, let's go with that. Let's run it to and through its natural progression and course and outcome. And if you actually do that, you actually end up almost refuting a falsehood or something that is, at some point, it has to break down. At some point, it has to fall over the cliff.
But I don't agree with you, because I don't think that they're willing. I don't think either side is willing to admit that they're wrong or that the facts that they have in their possession are not true. I think there's another issue also going on, which is very psychological, which is that it's very hard for people to admit that they're wrong, especially when they've dug in their heels for 5 years. So, everything that has happened in the country over the past, since he started running and since he became the president, and he's such a phenomenal manipulator of media, and the press really bears a tremendous responsibility for what has happened here. But people who voted for him or who support him, I think that they watch every escalating event with horror, and yet they don't want to turn to other people and say, I was wrong. This family member that I talked to, he later sent me an email and said, Trump leaves a lot to be desired, but I still admire him because of what he did for Israel. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, he moved an embassy, but he incited a crowd to rage, and they killed 5 people, and they tore apart the Capitol, which is our major symbol of democracy. So it sort of just doesn't make any sense. And I think that, one of the things that Tamsin is talking about is used in psychology. When people have tremendous anxiety, they're encouraged to ask themselves, how do I know that this is true? Well, I'm scared that I'm going to get COVID. Well, how do I know that this is true? What can I do to protect myself? What can I do to make sure that I'm not going to get COVID? What can I do to protect the people I care about? How can I make sure that I'm presenting myself in a way that's adhering to certain values and guidelines that we know will protect us as much as possible from the virus? And that's something that you go through when you're feeling very anxious about something. But you can talk to yourself sometimes, and sometimes you can't. And I feel like these conversations are similar. It's like you hit a wall with people, and it's just astonishing. The power of the media is immense, and they created a monster in Trump. And I think that they have a lot of blood on their hands, quite frankly.
Adam John says we need to move back to news and away from a reliance on news media, which is fundamentally the sensationalism of information oversharing verifiable facts. And John Ruan says not all assertions of fact are worthy of.
Bingo! These 2 men are now my best friends, Adam and John. We should hang out. Let's have a Corona cocktail. Yeah.
Right, well, maybe they'll come to the after show. John adds, is he still your favorite? He says, look to the intention of the fact purveyor if you want to understand the fact.
Okay, but let's go into that further, because I think content creators are just as culpable. So unfortunately, I have a really good friend whose husband is on ECMO. And so I did some research last night to determine how sick he really was. And if you look at the blog posts around ECMO, there are some people who say 60% of people survive treatment with ECMO. And then there are other blog posts that will say there's a 35 to 40% mortality rate with ECMO. Now, which one, if you're a sensational journalist or you need clicks or you need views, are you going to use? You're going to use the scarier fact. And I see this all the time in B2B, in B2C, in the healthcare space that I inhabit. We as a community of content creators have got to move away from thinking about our content as something that's used to just get our business and vanity metrics in a certain place, but really thinking about, particularly in healthcare where people are freaked out and so scared, how are we going to calm them down from their stress response and help them make important decisions? And I think that that's the thing that I'm so passionate about. And when I think about what's happened in the news media and I see what's happened with the coronavirus, it makes me even more passionate that as a healthcare community, it's our job to really make sure that we're giving people the ability to get out of their amygdala and back into their higher functioning, executive functioning, so that they can make good decisions. And we need to stop using potentially terrifying facts, but instead talk about what they really mean. And to do that, you need a lot of education. And I think a lot of people sometimes just want to grab the fact and not read the article or not truly understand it and be thoughtful about it, and instead just want to post whatever it is that they write really fast, and that's dangerous.
So I'm going to give you an example of that in a moment, but I was on your phenomenal Twitter account. Both of these are from your Twitter account. And there was this content strategy has become content design, and content marketing has become content strategy. What is happening? So we'll talk about the power of words, because words are the foundation of content, whether they are written words or spoken words or sometimes visual words that don't need, actual letters, but certainly communicate. Talk a little bit about this post, why you wrote it, and obviously besides the tongue in cheek, what's really going on here? Because there are a lot of people, I'm sure, that are watching. There are some people that are content strategy masters, and then there are some people trying to figure it out. So help us kind of put everything into place and into some kind of maybe logical perspective.
Well, I can give you the historical perspective on it, because I don't think there's a lot of logic here. What happened was that, so before Christina Halvorson wrote Content Strategy for the Web, which I think was really the term that she used to sort of unite a discipline, there was something called web design strategy or web strategy. Then information architecture sort of became canonized as information architecture. And content strategy came into being, I want to say, let's see, when did I start my career? In 2005. So sometime around 2005, 2006, when I started my career in web writing, this sort of content strategy became sort of this discipline. She published her book. There was the OG, the old gangsters of content strategy, sort of the founding members, the people who were really involved with it from the very beginning. And, we had to really work hard to convince people that content strategy really mattered. And the way that we thought about it was the intersection of business goals with helping users be able to accomplish their tasks. And we thought about it from a UX perspective, user experience. We thought about it from a business strategy. And I think what really ended up happening was that there was no clear way to define what we really meant. So some people thought content strategists were writers, and other people thought that they were business strategists. But people, content is the least important, most important thing there is, to paraphrase Don Draper from Mad Men. So, it just, and some people thought content strategists were UX people, and it never really, it's always like something you have to define and explain. Meanwhile, the world is obsessed with design. Apple design, Facebook talked about design, and everybody cared about design. So I think what ended up happening was that when Sarah Richards redesigned UK.gov, the way she thought about it was, how do we start from a content first perspective, which, if you really read about content design, is really a people first perspective. How do we figure out what people really want, and how do we then design? And design is very easily defined as solving a certain amount of problems within a universe of sort of boundaries. And so her whole thing was, how do we solve people's problems, knowing that the way we're going to get information to them is through the web? And I think people just love the idea of calling it content design, because then they could go in and say, I'm a designer, and they could get paid more money. And that's really honestly the way that I think that this transpired. And then content strategy sort of got, because it has the word strategy in it, people really started to think about it as business strategy. And so content marketing is really thought of as a business strategy element. And so I think content marketing got swooped into this idea of content strategy. And I think people are just arguing about these dumb words, and it's really kind of annoying, because it's just an argument for an argument's sake, and it's not necessarily really going to help anybody identify. When you read about content design at different companies, sometimes they're talking about UX writing, sometimes they're talking about content strategy, sometimes they're talking about user experience. So it's almost like it's company dependent, and we haven't formed this universal term for what it really is. What I think content people have to do is know something about everything and everything about something. And that's how they're most competitive in the marketplace. You have to know a little bit of the principles of content strategy and how to use them, a little bit of the principles of content design, a little bit of the principles of user experience, a little bit of the principles of information architecture, and then really hone in on what the job that you're being asked to do is asking you to do. And then have the expectation that when you move on to another job, it may look totally different.
So there's a power there's the power of being a generalist for the most part. This idea of, let me see if I got it correctly. They know something about everything, and what was the other one? Everything about something?
Everything about something, yeah.
So what's interesting is I'm going to introduce at the, and I say this, I bite my lip, because I know you're going to probably say, I disagree. I love the fact that you're disagreeing with me on so many things. I need more guests like you. This is awesome. But I want to give you, and I'm cringing, but I'm still going to do it, another term. So not, content design, not content strategy, not content marketing, but maybe you'll agree with me. It is the idea of content responsibility. And I'm paid by the acronym, or by the bingo bullshit bingo word as a consultant. But really, in all seriousness, this is what I took away from what you were saying, which is words have meaning, words have power, and we have a responsibility when communicating those words, especially when the words have weight and the meaning behind the words have weight, and quite frankly, we're trying to save lives. And that's why I said maybe we need to start to talk about content integrity, content responsibility, and not just push out content and so frivolously, so superficially, or so maybe even callously, as opposed to recognizing that these, that we have a job to do.
Well, it's a very nice idea, but in corporate America, it doesn't work. So we have to remember also that the first part of content strategy was fulfilling the business objectives. And so very often when you work up the chain of command, the chief marketing officer might say to you, I don't really care. I have to go into the CFO's office and prove return on investment. So you need to show me that our traffic increased. Well, what's the number one way to get traffic to increase? It's to publish a scary headline. So unfortunately, what's happening is that we want people to have, integrity is defined as what you do when no one is looking. Are you fulfilling your values at that point? Sometimes it's a really challenging thing. We have clients come to us and ask us about things and ask us to do things. And it's complicated to sort of sit down with a client and walk them through what the risks are. Now, that's the job of a consultant. And I feel like we do it really well. But there are times when I'll say to a client, don't fall on your sword for this. It's just not worth it. And it might be something where you would say, hey, Ahava, that's in a really gray area. And my response to you would be, life is lived mostly in the gray. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. Should it be something we're talking about? I think it's a table stakes idea. Of course, you should be responsible with your content, but it's not so easily played out in reality. And I think that good professionals understand that they are sometimes going to get in trouble and they need to know how to get out. And that, I think, is what really being responsible is not looking at every blog post or every headline, but thinking about a trend line. You showed your weight. I thought it was so interesting. So you gained a pound this week. Who cares? Your overall trend is that you've lost a considerable amount of weight. And I think if you were looking at each piece of content in its own, like we talked about the context before with the watermelon ice cream, you're going to drive yourself nuts. It's the overall, did I produce 5 pieces of content out of the 20 that month that I'm really proud of, rather than did I produce 15 that I feel really bad about? That's, I think, where the scales have to sort of come into play, and you have to really think through, well, if there are 15 that I feel really bad about, but if there are 15 that I feel okay about, but there are 5 I'm really proud of, then maybe that's enough in the job you're in.
Very, very profound words. And I was thinking, as you define that familiar and very, very important definition of integrity, what you do when no one's looking, you could almost very easily apply that to content, which is almost what you write when no one's clicking. And it's the stuff that isn't, it's the stuff from the heart. It's the stuff that perhaps isn't going to get the engagement or or the virality, but ultimately it's the stuff that's important. And for me, this was another of your tweets that you're talking about, and it says plain language. Everyone should use it when talking about COVID-19 vaccines. Remember, the average American reads at a 7th or 8th grade level. Well, first of all, let's just take a moment. And I'm asking if it's true. I know it is, because you wouldn't say it otherwise, but that's insane.
It's worse than that. 13% of Americans are functionally illiterate. And when you go state by state, depending on the state, it gets better or worse. So what you're talking about when you say that somebody's functionally illiterate, it means they can't read a prescription label. They can't, fill out an insurance form. They don't really understand the ins and outs of what they're trying to accomplish on a regular day. That's 13%. That's 13 out of 100 people. That's not insignificant when you're talking about a country that has public education the way that we have public education. And so when you think about that, and you think about that the first thing you want to do as a writer is have empathy for your audience, then you really need to really think through the words that you choose. Crocstar, which is an agency out of England, did a really fascinating plain language study where they showed that actually almost everybody at every education level would prefer a longer explanation that takes them more time to read than a shorter explanation that uses jargon or complex, writing. So I think that when we look at those kinds of studies, and when we bring data to people and say to them, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services estimates that $230 billion is spent on people's literacy levels because they don't understand what to do in a healthcare situation. That's $230 billion. I mean, when you think about that, it's just a crisis of unbelievable importance. And I have to tell you that I've done studies where I've looked at the way that Australia and New Zealand talked about the virus on their health websites and the way that the United States did on their different health websites, including the CDC, and we didn't do a good job. So that's 400,000 people that died. Now, a lot of them would have died anyway, but there are some of them that would not have died if they had had trust in government websites, if the media had had a unified approach to talking about the virus, if certain media outlets did not disseminate false information or conspiracy theories. I mean, there are a lot of people that unfortunately really, I think, are responsible for 400,000 people being dead. And it's not just the government. There's a lot of other people who were part of that terrible, terrible misinformation campaign.
I want to go down that rabbit hole. It's not a rabbit hole. It's at all, because it's a path of light. Today is also National Thesaurus Day, and what's interesting is this is a show called Corona TV. Now, I could convince people all I like that Corona is a beer, or it is, what I hope people take away from it is a circle, a crown, a ring of light, a tiara, a wreath, a rosary, a cigar. I don't even know. But there's this idea of the power of words, and the words have meaning, and then we think about how words have also been taken out of context. So I think of like mask up. Wear a mask. That's simple. That's plain English. That's about as simple as it gets. I think your argument is, yeah, but when it's completely, submerged, suffocated, and covered with all of the other misinformation, the idea of being weaponizing words, weaponizing content, weaponizing information, that's when it loses, maybe not its meaning, but it loses its power and its impact. So my question to you, I know you want to please respond to that, but to me, there's this idea of there is a laziness when it comes to content strategy, and then there's also this idea of jumping on a bandwagon, piling on the pain. Even the concept of talking about weaponizing information is itself part of the problem. So I don't know, in that rant or blurb or whatever the hell that was, I'm sure you saw something of meaning.
No, I see a lot of things of meaning. So here's what I want to say about that. Let's look at this in a historical perspective, which is only going back to last March, but I think it's an important thing to think through. when you're a great content creator, you're not just thinking about the information you're trying to convey, and you're not just thinking about your audience, you're also thinking about their psychology. The CDC says very clearly that a pandemic is just as much of a communications crisis as it is a health emergency. And they have a very clear playbook for how they follow what a pandemic should look like. They have an entire chapter, chapter 8, go download it, on their website, under the EIS website, which is the Epidemic Intelligence Service. And they talk about how what you should do is you should put one spokesman or spokesperson in front of the audience. That person should be a scientific figure with trust. And that person should very clearly enunciate to the people that this is an emerging situation and we don't have all the facts. Human psychology is terrified of not having all the facts, particularly in a society like ours. And unfortunately, when you don't say that over and over and over again, you unfortunately create a misinformation setting. So when the Surgeon General or the head of the CDC says to people, please don't wear masks, we need to send them to the public health care workers on the front lines, you're making a tremendous, he didn't know that that was a mistake. At that moment, he thought it was true. But then when the WHO came out and said, wear masks, the World Health Organization, and the CDC fought them for a while, you now have that friction for people. And then you add on top of it when the CDC was like, yeah, you should wear masks. And all of a sudden it becomes politicized. And it's like, well, you didn't know and you didn't tell us and you're changing your mind now and you're going against Trump and you're going against the Republican Party. And why are you making fun of us? And it starts to shock you. And yet, where does it come from? It comes from a basic terror in the human psyche that you don't understand this. And one of the reasons that I think the conspiracy theories have flown up so much is that people can't believe that a bat could carry a pathogen that would be passed on to another animal that humans would eat and that the world would suffer millions of deaths. They just can't imagine that something that simple could create such terror. And that's part of human psychology also. And that's why we have things like religion, to give us sort of this idea that there's something, a higher power conducting this, but most people can't sit with that simple idea. And so I think that that's why in thinking about the psychology of the people that you're talking to is almost as important as thinking about the problems that they're trying to solve, particularly in a high pressure, high risk situation. And I think that what happened was that the CDC playbook did not get followed. And because of that, you had a tremendous amount of misinformation. And I think Fauci himself would look back at some of the things he said and some of the things that he did, and he would probably say, we should have done a better job at highlighting the fact that this was something we just really didn't know, and we were giving people the best information that we could at the moment, and trust us because we are going to get it to you as fast as possible. And if there are things that we've said that are different, accept that as a mistake, be vulnerable, be modest, be humble, and say, but now we need you to do X.
I feel like there's almost a bit of a catch-22 here, though, because let's go back to the beginning. I feel like Fauci never really, he always was humble. He never professed to be a know-it-all or had all the answers. And when at the time he said, spoke about masks, that was weaponized and used against him, which is even Fauci told you not to do this. And somehow it was never resolved. I'll tell you my idea that I've been talking about. I came up with a concept called the Supreme Court of Truth. And what happens is whenever any piece of information or assertion is then, brought up to the Supreme Court of Truth, who then rule on it, and whatever their ruling is basically now the de facto law of the or truth of the land. So therefore, you cannot use the argument that Fauci said whatever when the Supreme Court has ruled on that, which is, that was done. That was at the time he thought, he believed it was true. You cannot argue that again. You cannot use that argument in defense of don't wear a mask. So he was somewhat humble, but the problem is, again, it's weakness and strength. When we say we don't have all the answers, we are perceived as weak.
That's correct. I agree with you, but I don't necessarily know that that's 100% true. I think that's an old idea that isn't really true anymore. And actually, one of the things that I'm doing right now is looking at how brands have changed their language over the last year, because I think they have become much more authentic and vulnerable, because that's what people demand now. They want brands to say, we're McDonald's, but go eat at Burger King because we need to keep restaurants alive. Or they want their shoe company to send them an email that says, it's been a really rotten year, we're giving you 50% off. Like, they're looking for that kind of emotional empathy. The other thing I want to say, and listen, this is going to be debated forever, but when you look at the swine flu and what Obama was facing, and I'm not saying Obama was a perfect president. That's not what I'm talking about. He followed the CDC guidelines. Why did that epidemic get handled so well? Well, you could argue it was a different pathogen. It wasn't as contagious, blah, 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 blah. But I have no doubt that the history of this time period will come back and say, we didn't listen to the scientists, and we didn't let the scientists do a really good job of communicating. And we politicized it, and it was a terrible, terrible way to handle it. And, I think at the end of the day, when you look back at 1918, the cities and the cities really that had the best success were the ones who listened to the scientists, and the ones that didn't suffered. Look at the difference between Seattle and New York. You know how many EIS members you have in Seattle as opposed to New York? New York stayed open for another week. We know what happened there. So, saying that you're wrong is part of science. That's what the science, the hypothesis, I forget what the scientific method says. Sometimes you think something and the experiment shows you that you're wrong. And that has to be a part of how we educate people and how we train them.
I mean, Ahava, it feels that it's funny that it goes back to the soliloquy talking about that quote from MLK, which is this idea of unity and being and being together. It's almost like, if we're going to be wrong, let's all be wrong together, because it's a lot easier than for us to move or pivot or adjust or triangulate appropriately. And I think the challenge here has just been these two almost fundamental, like, I don't even use the Z word, which I now have to mention, the zealot, it's just, there've been these words, which is just, I'm going to fall on my sword, and come hell or high water, I'm not changing my position for anything. And so, of course, you and I would say, follow the science, because we would. But it's to your point, if the CDC was going to be wrong, let them at least lead us. Let them lead us. Let them be wrong.
Right.
Let them make a few mistakes. But ultimately, we're in better hands if we all follow, not like lemmings, but if we all follow and or are led down a very unpredictable, scary path.
Yes, I agree with you. I'll also go further. Although the MLK quote is beautiful, I think the lost quote here applies more: live together, die alone. So, I think that one of the things that was so terrifying about this whole thing was that you were sort of dependent on your neighbor in a way that you've never been before, which is, if you don't follow these guidelines, then more people will get sick. Well, if more people will get sick, then the risk of my contracting goes up. If my risk of contracting goes up, my risk for my family goes up. And I think that that's where, that live together, die alone statement is really critical, because we weren't willing to do, I think, some of the things that we had to do to take care of our neighbors and our friends and our communities. And, just as much as I blame the media, I blame individuals. My behavior hasn't been perfect either. I was just talking to somebody, the two values that we've tried to raise our children on is, one, be a mensch, be a good person, make good choices about the way you treat others and the way you treat yourself. And two, people are messy. And I think that that's another thing that we really have to remember, is that people are not consistent. They don't always behave rationally. How do we let them live within that messiness and still give them good guidance? And I think that we really failed at communications here. And I think the companies and the organizations that were successful at it were able to give people bite-sized pieces of information that they could follow and feel healthy and feel good about their choices.
So clearly you put them together, and the idea is be a messy mensch.
Expect people to be messy. Don't expect them to be consistent. They're not going to be consistent. It's not human nature. And be okay with that and understand that and forgive it, but still give people, enough rope so that, not that they hang themselves, but that they feel like they can live within those guidelines. So if you're going to be inside during the cold weather, wear a mask and stay distant. Don't assume that people aren't going to go inside.
I am very much looking forward to spending more time with you on our Zoom after show. And if you want to join Ahava and myself and our wonderful regulars, all you got to do is just click on bit.ly/CoronaTV.show. And but before we do that, I have a quote for you, because there's always a quote of the episode. And this is the quote, which, I was trying to think about content strategy and this idea of the content flood and all of this. And this is the one that somehow I just settled on. No wonder wired means both connected to the internet and high, frantic, unable to concentrate. I just thought it was a good way, and it seems like it does summarize what we were discussing as well, which is the manicness of it all. Too much being bombarded, the fire hose, not being able to see the wood for the trees, facts versus alternate facts. Two things can always be right, Ahava? The glass can be half full and half empty at the same time. It is hard to be able to discern what is real and what is not.
I'll also say that wired means focused. It's got a third definition, right? Are you wired into what's really happening? And I think that that's an important thing to remember also. But what I want to say is that I hope I didn't lose anyone's anxiety.
No, I think part of this, by the way, this is Johan Hari, who is a UK journalist, who said this quote. I think what's important is the power of talking. We need to talk. We've got to talk. We've got to be able to articulate. And in fact, I'm not just saying it when I say I love you saying I disagree with you. Those are like my best words in the world, because what's the point in having Joseph clones on the show? Like, the conversation is about taking different positions. But ultimately, if two people respect one another, and if two people are trying to arrive at a better place, disagreement is our friend, not our enemy. And the more we talk about it, the more we can actually, as opposed to this person who on Facebook, and she's an elderly woman, and I could have just ignored her. I could have said opt out. I could have blocked her. I could have done so much. But instead, I was like, I wanted to help her. I didn't know that I had all the facts. I certainly didn't want to argue with her. But it's important that we talk, because the worst part of isolation and loneliness is our inability to connect and communicate with one another.
Yeah, and I think I've learned something important too, which is maybe not to say I disagree, but instead to say, I see it in a different way. And that's another good way, because when you say to somebody, I disagree, you might be putting them on the defensive, which obviously you weren't, because you were here to hear other points of view. Otherwise, you wouldn't run this show. But I think that maybe a smarter way, a more wired into people's psychology way, is to say, that's interesting, but, I see it a little bit differently. And it's
that's also the more politically correct way to do it. And you do not strike me as someone who is, always being wary of a couple of eggs that break. And we need more people like you, that's for sure. And I've got to tell you, and again, this is not pandering, but how on earth would you hire any other firm but this firm? Because it's the first time I've ever heard people talking about psychology and empathy with respect to content strategy. I love it. I also love, by the way, on your website, it's just as simple as, first I thought it was a pop-up. I was like, what? And then it was like, nope, need better content for bigger goals. You're in the right place. How can we help you? I'm like, this is brilliant. It's, just drop down and immediately find what you're looking for. So if you are looking to find some clarity and some quality in your content strategy / design / marketing / responsibility, all you got to do is go to Aha. It's not even Aha anymore. Just go to ahamediagroup.com. If you want to find out more about or connect with Ahava, you can connect with her on the LinkedIn, on the Twitter, on the Instagram, and have more of these kinds of, I think, needed and necessary conversations. So Ahava, thank you so much for coming in, but I'm not going to let you go yet, because you have the first Corona question response of the week, which who would play you in a movie? The world wants to know.
I would be very flattered if Kate Winslet would play me in a movie.
Hold on a second. I've just got a text from her agent. She has said it will be her honor.
And this isn't fascinating enough to put in a movie, but I think she looks enough like me, and she's also a person who's not afraid to break a few eggs, and I think that that's some, a quality that comes through.
And hold on, Her agent just sent another response, which is, where can I get those hot pink glasses? So, you know, I'll connect the two of you.
Awesome. iBobs.
Ahava, we're going to head over to the Zoom after show. Thank you again for coming in. And, you know, in the words of our grand warden of the show, Mr. Chuck Norris, he generally decides who gets the thumbs up or the thumbs down. He seems to like all of my guests, so maybe he likes me, but this is what he had to say about you.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
There you go. And we will be back tomorrow, and hope you can join us then. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Bye.
Thank you for watching Corona TV with your host, multiple author and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. Corona TV is the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing. The after show on Zoom starts right now at bit.ly/Corona TV After Show. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show at CoronaTV.show. And if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, text Corona TV to 66866 or visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.